Hey guys, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to attempt to build a short retaining wall right where the arrow's pointing for my parents' backyard. As you can see in the pictures, I've done some previous work to create a vegetable garden area, such as I put landscape fabric down, I did gravel, the raised beds, halfway completed the picket fence, but along the way I just have noticed some issues because I kind of just want to start fresh. One of the main issues is that the backyard is on a slope, which has made it difficult to keep the gravel walkways and the soil in the raised beds contained. I initially wanted to hire this out, but was quoted around $8,000 for a roughly 37-foot long by 16-inch high wall, which probably isn't bad, and they would have done it in a day or two, but it just wasn't in the budget. So I'm just going to tackle it on my own. My goal is just to create a wall that's high enough so that the ground is fairly level with a slight slope to facilitate drainage. I do want to preface this video and state this is not a tutorial, it's just the steps I followed based on the guidelines and recommendations I found from doing research online, and it's specific for the height of my wall, which is 16 inches. So just take that into consideration if you want to tackle this project on your own as well. So my first step in starting this project was clearing out the raised beds, all the gravel and the landscape fabric, and all the fence posts as well. Once I had cleaned most of the area, I started digging a trench. When trying to figure out how deep the trench should be, most websites recommended digging the trench at least half the height of the stone, plus 3 to 4 inches to accommodate for the crushed concrete base. I used 8-inch stone for my base row, so half of that is 4, plus about 4 inches of gravel, so I dug 8 inches deep. And then I made my trench 12 inches wide to accommodate for a drain pipe I'll put in later. And then it spanned about 37 feet. To make sure my trench was staying straight, I did tie a piece of string to the fence and then another piece to a stake, and then just pulled it tight to create a straight line. Along the way, I also used my level just to make sure everything was staying level from front to back and side to side. After digging, I laid down Dewitt Pro 5 landscape fabric and used landscape staples to keep it in place. The next step was the crushed concrete base. I went to a local sandstone supplier and bought about 1 cubic yard of the crushed concrete for around $20. For this next step, I started off by shoveling 4 inches of crushed concrete into the trench. Every few feet, I would check to make sure I was staying level and then would also tamp it down, and I just continued the same process until I got to the very end. I will note that this step did take some time just because I wanted to make sure as I was laying the crushed concrete down to use my level to make sure it was level from front to back and side to side. And then also the crushed concrete I received did have some larger pieces that I had to separate out. So just be mindful of that when you're buying in bulk. And then I just ended up using those larger pieces for drainage later on. I just used a 4x4 post that I had as my tamper, but you can also buy one at your local hardware store. Once I had the initial first 4 inches of crushed concrete down, I went back through and tamped everything down again. After tamping the first 4 inches down, I then went back to the beginning and added another 4 inches of crushed concrete and just repeated the same process. Next, it was time to start laying the stone. We rented a Home Depot truck to pick up the initial 1 ton of stone. For my base stone, I used 8-inch chocolate sandstone, and then I would just make sure it was level, and then I would put the stone in place. I used my smaller level just to make sure it was level from front to back, and then had a longer one to make sure I was staying level throughout the different pieces of stone, and then would just use a mallet to kind of tamp it down in place. After I had the first layer of stone in place, I placed a corrugated drain pipe and added a sleeve to prevent any soil from entering it. However, when I had the company come by to give me a quote on a wall, they told me a drain pipe wasn't necessary since my wall wasn't that tall, but since I already had it, I just went ahead and installed it just for extra drainage. I just had the drain pipe span the length of my wall and then cut it with a knife and added a drainage grate at the end. Once I had the drainage pipe in place, I then began the second row by dry stacking the chocolate sandstone, and here you'll see I used 4-inch stone, and then afterwards you'll see me go back and attach it using an adhesive. For my steps, I just laid my stone flat instead of vertical, and then since my drain pipe was slightly higher, I went back in and added a little bit more paver base so the step would be slightly taller than the drain pipe. After I added the second row of stone, I began to fill in the back of the retaining wall with drainage rocks. Once the drainage rocks were in place, I covered the area with the landscape fabric I had left over and then placed the second stone that I would use for the steps for the stairs. I went back and used the PL 500 landscape glue on the second row, and then I did the same thing for the third row as well. Thankfully, I didn't have many stones I needed to cut, but the ones I did, I used an angle grinder. I would cut it about halfway through and then hit it against the hard edge, or just use a mallet or hammer. The final thing I did for the retaining wall was just add the leftover 4-inch stone around my top step just to make it look a little nicer. And then I also did go back and add my leftover 4-inch stone to kind of make that bottom step a little wider. And then I was complete with the project. Overall, I love the way it turned out. I'm sure there are things I could have done differently. I feel like I accomplished what I wanted for the area. This project did take me about a month to complete just because it rained and stormed here a lot in May in Texas. So there was a lot of pausing and having to wait a couple days for things to dry out. Here's the estimated cost breakdown of all the supplies I used. Stay tuned for part 2 of this garden makeover, and thanks for watching.